everyone. Welcome to the Asian Arts Media Roundtable 2021. I'm Nabila and I'm from Arts Equator. Thank you for joining us once again for the master conversation, this time number 3 on set design. As you know, this series is organized by Arts Equator as part of the Asian Arts Media Roundtable. And this year it's being done in conjunction with the Singapore International Festival of the Arts. You can actually check out the festival website because the online offerings will actually be available from the 5th to the 20th of June. Now, Master's Conversation is a series that we started after realizing that critics are just not very good at writing about elements of design. The reasons, there's many. and today, of course, we'll be looking at set design specifically and hopefully learning some of the vocabulary or ways in which we can better write about elements of set design. We're joined by our friends from the Philippines today. We have Tuxqs Rutaquio, who is a designer for theater. But on top of that, I think he's done acting. He is also a director. I'm sure he's done almost everything. Maybe we can ask him later. He was actually the Associate Artistic Director of Tanghalang Filipino and has been Virgin Lab Fest dramaturg and festival director since 2011. And joining him in conversation is Katrina Stuart Santiago, an independent cultural critic and opinion writer from Manila. She's written for several websites, including her own, katrinasantiago.com, as well as various other publications, including Arts Equator. So we're very excited to have both of them here today. As usual, we'll start with the presentation, and then we'll have a live conversation before we open it up to Q&A. So without further ado, I would like to invite Katrina to take it from here. Thank you, everyone.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm very, very happy to introduce Tuxqs Rutaquio to you guys. Like many of us in who do work in culture, he is a multi-hyphenated cultural worker. He is a director and production designer of the theater. He was also once an actor and still says yes to projects that interest him. In recent years, he has focused on theater education and is currently the chairperson of the production design program of the School of Design and the Arts in the College of St. Benilde in Manila. My interest in Tux's work as a critic was always premised on his daring to work on texts that didn't spoon-feed the audience and instead insisted on complexity, which also just feeds upon the exercise of criticism, which is a rare thing, I think, in the Philippines in general, but I think even in Asia. For this master conversation, we will be focusing on his largest body of work, which is in set design, as we will be talking about his shift towards scenography, especially given these pandemic times. Tux pre-recorded his presentation as this is the first time that he will be talking about his set design work for a public audience, and we really didn't want to miss out on anything. We will then have a conversation about his work, this relationship we've forged between artist and critic, which is really a friendship that has spanned, I think, the past decade or so. And then we really want to encourage all of you to join us in conversation afterwards. So without further ado, here's Tux presenting his work to all of you.
Good day. I'm Tuxqs Rutaquio. I'm a set designer and a director. I would like to share with you how I started as a production designer in the theater and eventually pursued directing while designing my own productions. After graduating from the university, I pursued my craft by participating in different productions from different companies in Metro Manila. In 2010, I was invited to be Associate Artistic Director of Tanghalang Filipino, a resident theater company under the Cultural Center of the Philippines, where I was part of the designing of the season programming while directing and designing my own productions as well. In 2015, up to the present, I decided to teach under the production design program of De La Salle College of St. Benilde School of Design and Arts. I actually entered the University of the Philippines as a fine arts student, major in visual design. And on my third year, shifted to theater arts as a technical major, focusing on set design. I was lucky that early on, I was given the opportunity to design productions under the theater company of the department, Dulaang UP or UP Theater, and became a resident production designer for almost 5 seasons. Under the educational curriculum of the department, we were mostly exposed to the classic and contemporary Western drama. And by this time, my mentors encouraged me to practice costume design as well to complete the overall vision of a production. As a set designer, I tried painting my own sets when I was still a student because this enabled me to practice painting, which I love. In this production of August Strindberg's Miss Julie, I waited for the construction of the set and then I painted the entire set on my own one whole day. The following are pre-design considerations that set designers mostly go through: script analysis, endless talks with both playwright and director, and of course, working on a budget. It is important to have a sense of what the theater space is like, whether it's a black box or a proscenium theater. It is through the familiarization that jolts the imagination of the designer to the possibilities of the visual language as envisioned by the playwright and the director. In the following slides, I will share with you some practices that I have learned based on experience and working with different directors and playwrights. These are various ways I do conceptualization. It is highly important that I know the text inside and out because that will be the crux of what I will be doing. I mostly look out for a powerful image, or I may be looking out for one particular character's movement in the grand scheme of the narrative. Or if I'm working on an adaptation or a class of a classical piece, I try to look out for the intersections between two materials. Afterwards, I proceed to provide a space to capture one of these inspirations as meticulous as possible. And most of the time, I provide a mathematical equation or a scientific method on how to tell the story. For example, will the audience see the ending as a repeat of the beginning? Or is it a cycle? Or will it begin with so much visual elements and end with nothing? So when I start sketching the space, I always treat it like a Rubik's Cube, where you can play with the layers, even if I don't know how to complete one color of a side. And adhering the Aristotelian theory of structure, the three layers of one side correspond to a beginning, a middle, and an end. Using the theater space as an image of the Rubik's Cube, I put in the required elements as I have conceptualized of a scene of the play, taking in consideration the walls and the floor of the stage. And then I place my BME or the beginning, middle, end on layers with special attention to height. Okay, this one is one layer from downstage to upstage. This one is from right to left from the audience's point of view, or from the audience's point of view. And this one is the height. Here's an example of how I created a visual language using only three elements: the proscenium arc, which is a semicircle, a tree branch, and a red chair, placing them with the corresponding BME. So the proscenium arc is the beginning, the tree branch is the middle, and the red chair is the end. And here is how it looks like in front. Notice that With just three elements, an emotion or a narrative can already be felt. Here, with the division of spaces and its power, uh, we try to figure out the position of the different layers on the theater space. The upstage plane is the farthest away from the audience, and anything that is placed on the lane simply exhibits the depth of the space and creates more distance from the viewers. And this is often usually serves as the backdrop of any action. The center plane serves as the most neutral space away from the audience. Anything that is placed on this lane exhibits an awareness of power and the sense of importance to the dramatic action. And usually it serves as the action area of the entire space, especially the dead center. The downstage plane, on the other hand, serves as the foreground to your picture area. Anything that is placed on this lane gives a direct relation to the audience by virtue of its nearness and therefore informs an important message. So it usually serves as the exposition area for your dramatic action as far as storytelling is involved. So let's now go to one of the productions that I did that uh, focuses on a powerful image. In 2014, I designed and directed a rap-through musical about a community devoured by the corruption of their local government. The title was Kleptomaniac, an abstract manifestation of a monster. This is a unit set with multiple entrances and exits. So this is the initial sketch that I did uh, for the set design of Kleptomaniacs. These entrances that you see in Act 1 will drastically change as an earthquake hit this community. So there are certain elements in the set design that define the community. The basketball court on the downstage area, the benches, a pedicab, and can barrels. So as an occupied space, actors were positioned as if being devoured by the set, as the entrances and exits become mouths of the monsters. The configuration by Act 2 changed the entrances and exits from the previous photos while still maintaining the powerful image of the monster. The set added levels through ramps. The set as alive. Uh, it's very important that the set has to be functional because the set as an actor with its own reason for being on the set. It, that means the set has to breathe its own life with the actors in it, with the existence of the actors. The movement, the set as movable elements on the stage for actors to manipulate, and the evolution of the set as changing and shifting throughout the narrative itself. So these are the three uh, components of making your set very much alive. So with movable elements on the stage for actors to manipulate, uh, in 2019, I participated as a designer collaborator with the young choreographer, Mr. J.M. Cabling, for a dance piece adaptation of a Filipino children's story, Ang Lihim ni Leia, or The Secret of Leia. The story goes a young child whose soul frees from her body during moments when the child is being violated or abused by the father. So as you can see in the cover of the book, Leia is actually facing or going through the door. Initially, I wanted a space where the abuse was present. So I worked on a cube, like the Rubik's cube, and then angled distorted the angle of the walls of the sides to evoke a sense of violence and made it like a razor-like edges. This is the initial sketch that I did. There were two walls that needed to have different textures to achieve a sense of the characters passing through them. And one wall has a strip of garters, while the other is made out of transparent plexiglass. So here, the framed room can be moved by the actors, just like the Rubik's Cube. And in the different configurations that you see on your screen, it also defines what the character is going through, not just as a geographically placed object, but also it creates an emotion. Like in the middle photograph, while she's being so restless, the set also becomes restless with her. In Tales of Manuvu, in 2009, I was invited to design the set for this Filipino folklore. Here, by using cloth draperies on battens and having different configurations using height, the space or the landscape changes with the storyline. So there are only four elements here. The three draperies that evoke the mountain or the landscape, and then the moon that goes up and down. And because it constantly moves, uh, the scene becomes different each time. Of course, with the help of the lighting. In 2015, I designed a stage for a Filipino adaptation of Pierre Choderlos de la Close's Le Liaison Dangereuse or Dangerous Liaisons. I also directed this. Here, with the geography of space, because the budget that time was not that big, I wanted to have a unit set or a static set, but divided the areas into different scenes. So the design is inspired by a beehive because uh, the space is divided into areas with the queen bee, the character of the madame, mostly occupying the center platform, while the rest of her workers and victims occupy the other areas. So here is the initial sketch and then the actual set without any actors. And if you can see, the center is the actual set without the actors. And on the sides are the different areas from the outside uh, of the different scenes that happen with the workers or the victims of Madame. The psychological space. Uh, the characters or locations, the blocking on the set is as relevant to the power relations within the narrative because it changes, it shifts the power dynamic and character evolution. And seeing the relevance or value of the different levels of the set design itself, uh, it creates that valuable visual language for the storytelling just by having them in levels. Here in 2013, I directed and designed the adaptation of William Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, set in World War II Germany, that we titled Der Kaufmann or The Merchant. In Der Kaufmann, I created the interior of a concentration camp prison with the protruding metal sheets as a representation of the slabs of meat. And then I created two layers. Okay, the Nazi generals mostly occupy the second tier of the stage area, representing the utopian ideal that Hitler wanted during the time, while the Jews occupied the lower area as a form of entrapment. So this is the initial sketch that I did, and this is the actual set without the actors. And as you can see here with the occupied space, all the Nazi soldiers and generals usually occupy the second tier, while the famous scene of judgment was done at the lower part of the stage area, especially the Shylock scene. Another example of the image of the levels as a powerful image. In 2011, I directed and designed a Filipino adaptation of William Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus entitled Tinarantadong Asentado. In this version, it is set 2 weeks before the elections in a state of paranoia and extreme desire to win. The story of a hitman who fights back bloodily unfolds. So the inspiration was actually an image that was said in the text, uh, wherein Titus described society like the burnt area of a clay pot. So this served as the visual image for the design of the stage, as you can see in an early sketch that I did. And this one is an early, it's actually a company call. So you can see the actual wall of the stage. So it looks like uh, a meat, a slab of meat. So here are the images from the performance of Titus Andronicus. So as you can see, it's like a clay pot. So that ends my presentation. Uh, Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Tux, and to all of you who have stayed with us throughout his presentation. I feel like I super read the room well before I even realized what kind of room I was going to get, because I realized that for someone who has seen Tux's work for the past decade, if not longer, I this was the first time I was seeing the concept, the concept that he was working with all the time across the work that he was doing. So I think that's something, given as well what I'm seeing in the chats, I think it's something that would be perfect to start this conversation with. Let's just walk the people through this theory of the Rubik's Cube. I think that my first impression was really just complete confusion about how it works, how it shifted from this set of images, and the idea of the beginning, middle, and end, and then how it later on is used in the creation of that hypothetical set. So maybe just walk us through it a little more. Like when you say beginning, middle, and end, you don't mean the beginning, middle, and end of the play, right?
No, 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 no. Actually, the idea of the Rubik's Cube stemmed out of my experience while doing both being a designer and a director. So right now, I'm working on the idea of how to tell a story in the mind of the director and as a set designer, trying to create a visual narrative on stage. So what you're looking at right now is actually an angle of the stage
Okay.
from the right side of the angle of the stage. And it's basically how an audience would view the set, not just as a whole, but in parts, no? And how it moves their gaze from beginning to end of a particular scene.
So in that first image on the left, now the cube kind of makes sense, right? So it makes sense that we're seeing the set from the right side,
Yes.
high up,
High
right?
up.
So
Yes.
that we're seeing the complete cube actually
Yes.
from that perspective. And so walk us through that. So the beginning is the proscenium, which is
The proceeding arc.
the arc in the front, right? Okay, go for
Yes.
it.
So when you view it, the middle part, the next scenic element is the tree branch. And then you go to the right side because the tree branch is like pointing towards the red chair. So there's a movement of the eye for the audience to understand the narrative of that particular scene.
So the
And
beginning, middle, end is actually the beginning of our gaze. to the
Yes.
end of our days of that
Yes.
stage,
Yes.
right? And this is like blew my mind when you showed it to me for the first time. Because I, again, as someone who's been watching theater and also just watching your work, I'm like, oh, there was something behind all of that. Whereas I was primarily just, always talking about your sets because they were always just so interesting to me relative to the productions that they were a part of. So I think this is something that we will have more questions on later on in the conversation. But I think it might be the appropriate time to actually go to whether or not reviewers or people who write about your work actually even see this. Is this even something that's ever appreciated, or is it even something that you expect critics to actually see when they go see a production with your set in it? So maybe let's start with the next slide. There's a couple of slides of write-ups and reviews. So these are two very different types of writing for theater that we get in Manila. The first one was actually from a press release about Der Kaufmann, but it already captures how the Nazi concentration camp, the set itself, was actually claustrophobic. And
Mhm.
then you have another review at the bottom. And this one is just like a very general, it really doesn't say a lot, but it praises you. It says that the set decoration by Tuxqs Rutaquio was top notch. And this was the one for Kleptomaniacs, the set that was a
A
monster.
monster.
So I think it would be an interesting place to start in terms of whether or not in reviews or write-ups like this one, what kind of reaction do you actually have given how the process seems to be very serious and long for you in terms of putting together a set? And sometimes, you have like a one liner in a review about your set design. How do you react, I think, to write-ups like this one?
Doesn't matter to me because what's important actually is for as long as they understood the vision of the entire play, and then probably uh, looking into the scenic elements and the costumes, they're just they just aided in the vision. So for as long as they understood it, it's fine by me. Whether it's short or it's long or it's actually a review of the entire set, it really doesn't matter. Because when I was designing it, I'm just designing it for my own framework of how I understood the text,
Yeah.
and that was important to me. If I understood it, uh, and then I placed it on stage, and it's the director approves it, then my work is done actually.
And you were telling me also that, in fact, more than anything, it's really also having an answer when someone, like some random person, asks you, why is the set like that? You like being able to say, oh, and then you can go on and have an explanation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I
maybe we
actually
can go ahead.
there was an audience member who asked me that. So what is that set uh symbolizes? And then I told him, and then oh, I didn't see that. So the layers of truth from what he has interpreted while watching the show changed
Yeah.
completely
Yeah.
because of what I threw in at him.
The next three are actually works that weren't part of his presentation, but actually got really good reviews for set design. These are the ones that are readily available online, and some of it actually surprised him because he didn't even realize they
I haven't read
existed.
all of them.
So this is the set for Mga Ama Mga Anak, which is a play, which is a period play set in the turn of the century, and it was written by national artist Nick Joaquin. So there was a layer of expectation, obviously. So this review is very interesting because not only does it praise the set design for bringing the writer back to the old world, but also it ends by saying, to some extent, a measure of the set design success is the fact that the kids in the audience couldn't help but take photographs. And this is something that's not allowed in the theater, technically. And so I'm wondering if that kind of audience reception is something that to you, it's a measure as well of the set's success and whether or not it's something that you welcome, given as well these times when, we do like young kids Instagramming our work, don't we?
I welcome it actually. If it will sell the production and the theater company allows it, so why not?
This particular review actually captures what you were wanting to do in that set design.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think that's one of those things that we also need to consider at a time like this one when even those rules about not being allowed to take photographs on the set seem outdated. Of course, now in pandemic times, we don't even go into the theater, so that
Yeah.
barely even matters. Can we
Actually,
see
this
the... Well,
criticism, he broke it down. Actually, he
yeah.
described the set, and for me, it's actually when a criticism allows for a continuation of a conversation outside of the theater, then my
You're
job
right.
is
Yeah.
done already. I guess.
Yeah. These next two ones are very interesting because they're kind of interconnected. And I really wanted to include Sasha Saturna for many reasons. Sasha Saturna is a major work from Carlo Vergara, a comic book artist and a writer. And it's major because it's actually the first gay superhero. And Jaja Zaturna is a graphic novel. It's a series. It's also a movie, and it was also a musical. It's a comedy musical. And one of the things that are special about Jaja in relation to Talks is that he also starred in the production for a very long time. So he was the Jaja Saturna before Jaja became a superhero. And Jaja is special because when she swallows this huge piece of stone, uh, the gay man becomes he becomes a superhero in the body of a female, but he's still a gay man inside. So it's a very complicated gender identity narrative, actually, which is ahead of its time. And in this particular review, I think what I also wanted, it's why I wanted to include it, is the fact that it's a different kind of set. It isn't as dark as the others that you've shown in your presentation. It's brighter and happier. And this review actually kind of captures it and calls it kitschy, and gives the carnival appeal to this crazy town that Ada, the main character, and Didi, her best friend, actually live in. So let's talk a little about Shasha Saturna and at what point in the 8 reruns that you
Yeah.
actually did the set design.
This one is actually the eighth restaging. I was the last designer to design this particular musical only because the previous designs for Jasha Saturna were all dark. And actually, I complained to the director and I told him, can we create a set that's more campy, more kitschy? I designed a few and actually worked on the source became the cover of the book. So if you look at the cover of the book of Jasha Saturna, it's actually that one with the rays and the stars and the flowers
Hours, yeah.
and the crown. So I wanted it so really campy and fun.
Was it different for you having lived this story for like 7 runs as a part of the cast as the main actor? Was
I
it
knew the
different for you
material
before? Yeah, I know, right? So
so
did that make
well.
it easier to like
Yeah.
build the set or plan it out?
Yeah, it was easier for me because I was in the production. I knew the comic book way before this musical uh, was done, and I'm actually a good friend of the comic book writer. So it was I knew him.
Yeah,
I knew his sense of humor. I knew his dark humor. I knew him as a person
yeah, yeah,
personally. So it was so easy for me actually to design this.
yeah.
Um,
I can
I
imagine.
thought that I work, it's my work as a designer for comedies are easier
Okay,
to design than the darker ones.
because
I
Because you're
don't.
funny.
Yeah, because I'm funny.
Is it because you're actually funny?
In person, yeah.
In person, right? I mean, I think what isn't being captured here is how much we laugh.
Yeah.
And because all the work seems so dark, there's
Yeah.
actually a lot of humor that goes into
The
the
productions.
planning. And
The
I think,
dark
yeah, the dark
productions
productions. And maybe that's something we can talk about later.
later.
And then there's another slide of another production. And this is what I'm saying. Darna is actually, which is the superhero on your lower right hand, the lower right hand photograph, is actually the inspiration of Sasha Saturna. Darna is the straight female version. She's also our Wonder Woman. And so in this particular Darna called Ding Ang Bato or Ding Give Me the Pebble, Darna has a younger brother who is deaf mute. It's also a modern dance musical. This was staged in the College of St. Benilde, and this is one of Tux's most recent works. And if you zoom in on that review, it actually talks about how, on the one hand, the set was very, very simple. On the other, it converted into a mountain or a stage. It was actually a collaboration among Tux, Jose Mejias, the projection designer, and Joaquin Jose Aranda, who was the lighting designer. And I thought this was an interesting thing to bring up because it's the first one where the write-up actually talks about, obviously, the collaboration on that set. So maybe you can talk a little more about that collaboration and how that changes the way you create a set design.
We actually I created the set, the design for Ding Ang Bato uh with focus on Ding, the brother who is deaf mute.
Okay.
Uh so it came from the eyes, through the eyes or through the lens of the deaf mute.
Okay.
And we actually had audiences who watched the show who are deaf mute. So I wanted to aid them. I wanted the set to be functional. So I created, the metaphor was sound waves. That's why there are waves on the set. And behind the panels are lights. So when the music is being played, the lights actually go to the beat of the music. So it aids the viewer uh, if there is the fighting scene, or if it's a dramatic scene between Darna and Ding. Um, so there. And also, that's why it was so helpful for the video projectionist and the lighting designer, for us to collaborate, because the lights help a lot, and the visuals,
Yeah.
especially for the deaf mute audiences.
So I think this is also like a level up, no, to just the idea of having a set that breathes, a set that is
Yeah,
alive,
yeah.
right? So that this one is not just alive; it actually functions very differently for a very specific audience.
Audience,
That
yeah.
we always like to get. I think this is always a challenge for those of us who work in the College of St. Benilde because we actually have full program for deaf
Mm.
mute students. Now this brings me to controversial. Wow, to to the next review that I want to bring up because I wrote it. And I only bring it up because I think when we were talking about bringing up reviews, one of the things we said was that who has written really? And apparently there were a lot who have written about your work. We just missed them maybe. But I like to bring up Doc Resurrection because I know for a fact that every time people ask you about the relationship we've forged with each other, that they ask you if I've ever criticized your work or done a negative review of your work, you would always cite this particular review. Now, I didn't know you when, when I wrote this. And Docres in particular was a very difficult text to watch because it actually is also it's also a play about the elections, but this one was really set in a very small, decrepit tiny space, a makeshift house near a river. And it's the story of two cousins. One of them is poor and is a nuisance candidate for the local elections. And the play starts with his richer cousin who comes home to the same space that he used to live in, to ask the nuisance candidate to actually withdraw his candidacy because he wanted to run in the same hometown. And so it was very violent. It kind of leveled up on the gore, and there was a lot of pent up anger that surfaces uh, across the play. And yet, apparently, what I thought when I watched it was that it was not crazy enough. And I'm talking about a play that had, like eyes being gauged out and
Gorged out. Yeah.
gorged out, and people being thrown into the river to die, and yet I, as a critic, thought it wasn't crazy enough. So let's talk about this review and and
Actually,
what you
my
thought
first
of it.
reaction when I read that review, I was actually honored to have been lambasted by Katrina Stuart Santiago, because I knew that she was right. Because this staging was actually a restaging already. So the original version of this play was actually in a small black box theater at the CCP, at the Cultural Center of the Philippines, during the Virgin Lab Fest. When I did that original piece, it was actually meant for a small theater. So when Tanghalang Pilipino asked me to restage it on a bigger theater or a bigger space, I knew that we will have problems there. And I knew that I was going to have a very difficult time to expand the vision. And that's why she was right about it. That it wasn't crazed enough because I wasn't able to create, first and foremost, the environment, because in itself it's a character.
Yeah.
The space itself where they are is a character. So I felt honored because I knew that she was right. So
And this is also the first time I'm hearing this. So I'm like, okay. So I think also, when I was doing reviews very regularly, which was when I wrote about Docres and a lot of your works, I think I also had a very clear sense of what I could expect from you
mm,
when you designed the set. And so it was also very clear, I think, when something just didn't quite fit in, or when something didn't wasn't quite working. I didn't really think in terms of a Rubik's cube, but but I feel like there was always a sense of that space to me that was important to capture as well.
mm,
And I think this also brings us to the next slide. Kathy and Nabila asked us to actually include this in the conversation, and I want to say beforehand that this is something that Tox and I always feel uncomfortable about, because it feels like we're talking about ourselves instead of allowing our work to speak for us. But I think it is an interesting story now that I'm being made to talk about it, about how Tox and I actually became friends. No? So, very quickly, as a critic, my general practice for the longest time was to not be known. So I would not go to exhibit openings. I would watch theater productions, and I would exit the theater the moment the lights turned on. I was not the one who would stay and do interviews with the cast or the production. I didn't feel like I needed to know any of them to actually write about their work. And so in this particular Virgin Lab Fest in 2012, the Virgin Lab Fest is the longest running theater festival in the Philippines. It's a festival, it's an annual festival of one act plays. On this particular year, I was trying to watch all six plays in one day, because that's how the Lab Fest is programmed. You can watch, there's four sets of three plays each. And I wanted to watch all the plays and write about all of them very quickly, because it only runs for 2 weeks. And I wanted to encourage people to come. So there was an even bigger reason why I needed to exit right away, other than I didn't want to meet people from the theater world. So on this particular lab fest, there was one show that I just rushed out of the theater, and I was running, literally running out of the cultural center so that I didn't need to see anyone. And just as I was exiting the door, Tux actually was also running and met me at the door. And so you can take over.
I actually saw her in the theater uh, when just before the play started, the first play started, and I was uh, I was already trying to uh, prepare myself to introduce myself to her after the play ended. So, but as soon as the house lights turned on, she was like a cockroach scampering away towards the nearest exit. So I have to follow her and really grabbed her and introduce myself because I actually didn't know why I did that, but it was actually out of respect because I have already uh read most of her criticisms, and there was something about the way she writes that for example, for Doc Resurrection, um, she always goes straight to what the essence of the play is talking about. She's not like the person who writes about a menu type, like these are the costumes, these are the actors, these are the set. It's almost academic, but she also takes care of her readers so as for them to understand the jargons of theater, to inform and to educate them about this world. So that's why I introduced myself to her. And also because she was writing so much about politics at that time, and I was also doing political plays. So that was our neutral ground, and I wanted to know more about her thoughts on politics,
Yeah.
on third world concepts, theories, because I knew that she was uh, your major was actually third world, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes. So I think also, of course, when we became friends, I think, and this is something we can flesh out later on in the conversation. It also, I think I told him at some point when we were already such good friends, and he was allowing me to see his work before it would be staged, to give him comments. And then I also did dramaturgy work for Kleptomaniacs, that one that had a monster set. So I lived in that monster set for for 2 months, I think. And I think soon after we became friends, I did tell him that it would mean I would stop writing about his work.
Yes.
Because it really felt like a conflict of interest. It's a constant struggle, I think, for me actually to grapple with the relationships I have with people who are also doing work that I really, really want to write about, but I feel like I might not be credible to write about as a critic anymore.
It was
Uh,
actually a sacrifice for both of us,
yes.
but a sacrifice worth saving.
Because we're here now.
It's worth saving. Yeah.
Yes. And I
I
think in
would
terms of
rather. I would
yes, and I think
rather.
in terms of sacrifices also, I think the collaborative work we've done, and we've done a lot of work, even just, he's gotten me to write for like a concert or an event that he was going to direct and do the set for. And so that kind of collaborative work has also been very good for me as a critic, I think. And I wouldn't really trade it for just continuing to be distant, right? And I think one of our biggest collaborations, I think, is just about to happen. And it's really a scenography festival that we're putting together for July. But we're already mapping out right now with a set of theater production companies and theater creators. And I think this shift to scenography is a very interesting one to end with for this conversation, because I know that you talked to me about this long before the pandemic, and then the pandemic happened, and so suddenly everyone's doing site specific work because we're all just stuck in our houses. And I think that it might be a good time to talk about scenography and what you're looking forward to in the next years, depending on how much longer we can't go into the theater. In the Philippines, for those who don't know, the theater is going to be the last to open. Just because that's the way things are in a country like ours. So can we cue the video, please? This video is actually Ang Mahaplos Ka, To Touch You, which is a Tagalog translation of the work of national artist Francisco Arceliana. It's a poem that was translated by playwright and writer Elmer Gatchalian. And Tux and Christine Krame and Elmer collaborated on this at the height of the pandemic last year. And I think this is like a very good space to talk about the scenography as a practice that you're starting to do now. So maybe you can walk us through this.
So months after the lockdown, Christine and I were talking via Zoom, and we wanted to create something using this platform. So we wanted to experiment, and I told her that I found this Filipino translation of To Touch You by Elmer Gatchalian, because at the time he was translating so many poems by different poets, and he was posting it on Facebook. So uh, I saw this poem, and it struck me that Christine and I would love to work on it. So I asked Christine to walk me through her residence so we can choose a perfect site for the work. When she showed me her room with a huge glass mirror, I told her that this will be our space. Using the beginning, middle, end. The beginning will be the bed, the middle part will be the mirror, and the floor, which is parquet, will be the end. So those were the three scenic elements that I wanted to capture for this piece. And then trying to make a schematics of each camera fitting to the line of the poem. So I told her to place the cameras behind the bed, uh, uh, on top of the bed. Um, what else? Actually, it's a laptop and the camera.
Okay.
And then
So
she
she
did
was doing this once? How
uh,
many times did she
many
do
times, many times. It was actually hard. Yeah, and then I had a person edit it for us and do the original music, and then I did the voiceover of the poetry. So if if you can hear it,
Buong kapangyarihan
it's actually me as an actor.
ng matagal
So it talks about the longing of touch, uh, especially during the time that we were so craving for that.
And it actually ends with her on the floor. So that's really
Yes,
the third element
the third element.
in the Rubik's Cube. That is not
Yeah,
a cube anymore. I'm like the Rubik's Cube.
the
That is
Rubik's
not
cube.
really a cube anymore here.
So that's the
Yes,
end part,
ends with that.
the floor. Because I like the texture. We knew that it will be in black and white because she didn't want to really capture her room as really messy and dirty. So okay, we'll do it in black and white.
Okay. So in instances like this one, I feel like the shift to scenography also means an expansion kinda of the work of the set designer.
Yes,
You're not just well, technically you're not like building a set, but you're actually looking at something and imagining it as a set.
yes.
So how does your role expand as you shift towards scenography in a time like this one?
So using the analogy of the Rubik's Cube, now the Rubik's Cube, the gaze of the viewer will be at different points or sides of the Rubik's Cube instead of just one side of the Rubik's Cube.
Okay.
Because we're now using different areas of a space
Yeah.
using this the screen. So the creator will have to utilize the camera on where to place the gaze,
Okay.
from whose point of view.
So suddenly we can see the cube is turning or the audience is
Yes.
turning. Yeah. It
Yes. Yes.
changes completely the experience of it as well.
Correct.
But how do you think, and I think this might be the question we're ending with, before we start the conversation with the rest of the people in the room. How does that change, you think, the role of the critic? Like, how are we supposed to view work that is technically just on our screens? And because the experience totally changes. So what, maybe just advice. I mean, I know that we're all still discovering this at
Yeah.
this point, but maybe what would be the advice for critics who uh, might also be wanting to actually write about what's being put out online, given what we can access at this point in time? What would be your advice in terms of watching performances online, or just this kind of theater that's online?
I think we have to be more aware and be sensitive to also the creator's point of view on how he created it in the first place. So we have to be sensitive to that. And maybe because of the idea of the cube, we cannot prepare ourselves as well as viewers to actually look at why it was intended for the screen,
Yeah.
why it was positioned that way, why were there so many cameras on it at different angles. Because now the experience of the space is different from the critic and the creator,
Yeah.
because the creator is now looking at how to utilize the technology while the critic is just here
Yeah.
in their residence just watching.
Yeah.
And nowadays all the performances are getting shorter and shorter with the TikTok, diba? The attention span is getting shorter. So as a creator, you have to also understand that uh, they're trying to understand the audience as well.
And
So
maybe
it's
also
really
an
being
awareness
sensitive.
of the platforms. Yeah.
Yeah,
Getting to
yes. You
have
have
a
to
grip on that.
familiarize yourselves with the platform as well.
Yeah.
So it's really, well, it's really hard because you have to be really sensitive to what's going on around, not just within your space, but also with the other spaces that is beyond
That
uh,
space that you're
that
capturing. Yeah.
particular space captured. So
I think that that's a perfect way to end the conversation. This is also something that we have talked about a lot in relation
mhm.
to the Scenography Festival and how we want to work with this idea of space, but see how much of it we can expand on. And I do think it's time for some questions from the audience. The first one is from Sokbir. On average, how long does it take to design these sets?
It really depends on the material. I usually have 2 weeks
For a one act. You have two
for a
weeks
one
for
act.
one act? Okay.
I have so many designs, sketches
Okay.
for the directors, so we can argue and talk about the my ideas. So I
Okay.
give him at least 5 ideas,
Okay.
5 designs, and then we'll talk about it, and then we'll combine it. It's really a rigorous process for me because I have to design at least five to 10.
For them to choose from, and so you can collaborate on it.
Yes, and then combine some elements from this design, design one, design two, and then
Wow.
combine it, and then we'll do it again as one.
Okay. And
So
then how many drafts of that do you do before it's time to build it?
probably 4 more.
Wow. So that's the 2 weeks
Yeah,
before building. So you can only focus on one set design at any given time.
yes.
But there was a time, when you would have like how many a month? Like you'd have, or
I,
like
I was
tell
young then,
tell
and I
me.
was doing 3 or 4 productions in a month, but different work. Like I would do
Different
costume
roles in
design,
each
yeah,
one.
different
Okay.
roles, and then I would direct in another production.
Do you also stay around for the construction of the sets?
Yes, I love working with painters
Okay.
and people who constructs the set.
So the
So
two
I love
weeks is
working with them.
for designing it and getting criticism, approval, etc., etc. Then when you finally have the final sketch, how many more weeks to build it? How long
Around
does that
two
take?
weeks.
And then
Two
2 more
weeks.
weeks.
2 weeks.
And then does it matter to you how it actually unfolds, how
Yes.
how the stage looks when they're doing rehearsals? So you
Yes.
also go for
I'm
that.
always there. That's
That's
why it's so painful for me at the end of the production when I'm still there. They're
and they take
destroying the
down the
set.
sets.
It's so
Okay.
painful for me.
And this, I think, also is why it's absurd that we don't have enough photographs of uh, your set designs because you're always there. But apparently, there is a lack of
I don't.
documentation.
I'm poor with documentation.
And you don't mind the criticism that comes with the work. How do you handle like the criticism that comes when you start showing like your 5 to 10 sketches to the director or the
I
playwright?
don't mind. I don't mind.
Where
I
does that
know.
come from? That attitude about criticism being part of the process. Is that
Uh,
school?
yeah, it's
Yeah,
in the school
yeah. It
that
is.
I have to be open and they will really lambast my work. I would expect that
Okay.
of my works because that's the only time that I can actually process to create more
Okay.
or the possibilities of the text.
So I think that's also something that is important for any of us really who do creative work, that there's an openness to criticism at any layer of the process. The next question is from Dandy. What will you do if the set has to be static? How do you make it alive beside the help from lighting design?
The actors, of course. The actors really help, especially when I'm also directing it.
Okay.
And I know that it's a very static space, so I will utilize that particular, for example, one area in the space. I will utilize it to make it more alive
Okay.
and as a whole because I play with my actors.
But that's also you as director already. But
Yes,
what
yes.
happens if you're not the director of the production?
I will suggest it to the director. That's part of our collaborations. I would suggest
Most of
actually
the time, I think this also gives people a sense of how small
the theater community
the
is.
theater community is in the Philippines.
Mm.
Many of them actually either went to school together or one was the teacher of the other.
Yeah.
And so that kind of comments and suggestions sometimes just happen as, banter, or in a joking way you say
Yeah.
something and then the next thing you know they're actually changing things.
Yeah.
And I think this is also why I tried to stay away from that kind of dynamic, because it felt like I wouldn't be able to
And
stop.
also because when I say yes to a project, I would actually take in consideration who the director will be if I'm the set designer because that's very important, the relationship between the set designer and the director, because they will set out the entire schematics of the play
Yeah, so
on the
their
set.
world. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think in relation to that, Gladys talks about watching a production where they tried to play leveling to show power of one particular character. But she couldn't see the actor at all because he was in the far left of the stage. And I was far on the far left of the stage as well. I want to ask Tux, how important is the inclusivity of the audience for set design, considering that not every audience watching the show will be from the center view?
Yes.
Great question.
Actually, it's the cube. I would go back to the Rubik's cube.
Yeah.
Part of it is really about the line of sight.
Yes.
So you have to try it out when the set is being constructed. While it's being constructed, you already go from the audience from all sides to see if everything will be seen at the in a good way for the
Or
audience.
how everything will be seen.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think for me, without knowing about the cube at all, right? My favorite seat in the house has always been the second floor,
Yeah.
always on the top, regardless of whether I'm on the right side or the left. As long as I'm above the stage, that
Yeah,
always
because
feels
you can
like
see the floor
I can see
pattern
everything,
actually.
because
Yeah.
I can see everything. Here's a very interesting question from Adriana. Has there been any instance when you felt a set of a show wasn't designed well? Could you walk us through your assessment that led to this opinion? You don't need to name the show.
Okay, okay.
And I ask this with interest in understanding your thought process in this aspect of theater making. In other words, I'd like to get a glimpse of how your senses respond to a set. In this case, an unfavorable or a negative response. Like when you enter a theater, I guess, to watch a show,
Mhm.
what makes you think, this set doesn't work?
That's the problem with me. That's why I don't actually watch many shows, because that's the tendency of my brain or even my senses to do when I'm watching, because my directing skills turn on and all the things that I know are turned on. That's why, for example, for sets, first of all, um, is it functional? Does it function in terms of in connection to the play or even to the actors? if it if the space is dangerous, if I feel that the actors are not very comfortable moving about on the stage, that gets me. There's something wrong with the design, because uh, any viewer, any audience uh, should not feel uncomfortable while watching a play unless it was intentional for the director
To make it uncomfortable.
to make
Yeah.
it uncomfortable from the very beginning. But if I see that there was a movement from the actor that she's falling from the, for example, from the set,
Or that they
uh,
trip over things.
yeah. So there was something wrong with it to begin with.
So I think here it's really also just a sense of whether it's a comfortable enough space, no matter
Yeah.
how uncomfortable the play might be. But
Yes.
there needs to be a seamless movement on that set.
And the way it was actually utilized,
The space itself.
the space itself, the geography is correct. The actors were actually utilized within the area, all the areas of the set, and of course we go to the design elements like the colors, the texture, of course, but more so the how it the function
Yeah. How it
of the entire,
contributes to
yes, the
the
entire
play.
structure. Yeah.
I think this is an interesting question to follow that up with. How would you approach set design for an abstract play where the storyline or characterization may not be so clear to the audience? I think this might be interesting for the play you did in Japan.
Yeah. Actually, I don't have a set there, but I let the audience imagine it.
Yes. So maybe you can talk about that a little.
I did a seed piece for the Asian Performing Arts Festival in Ikebukuro. It was only 15 minutes. You have to create a 15-minute piece with a theme. The theme for that year was rain. So I figured that I'm not going to actually let rain on the stage, but I used the idea of the teru teru bozu. It's a rain doll that they hang on windows to ward off rain. So it goes down at very specific lines in the text. But on the floor area, I don't have, I just have a bench, I think, at one point. But it's actually more using psychological space. So I let the audience imagine what the space will be using the movement of the actors. So
So
that's how abstract it was.
there was no set.
There was no
It's
set,
not been set. And I
just the
think
rain doll.
also there really isn't a body of experimental work yet
Yeah.
in the Philippines. There's a lot that's been happening the past year, which might be interesting to look at for Keway lang. The other question is from Corey. She's wondering about a couple of things. One, she noticed that most of the work you shared here are set pieces for the proscenium stage. I'm curious about your experience with other kinds of stages or settings, thrust, arena, etc., or other kinds of theatrical environment, site-specific, immersive, etc.
I also did a lot of in the round or arena staging. I did one, a children's musical, 12 pairs of shoes, Sandosenang Sapatos. The set was actually, it's shaped like a shoelace, but it's a, what do you call that? A rink. The shoes, the character of the shoes are in rollerblades. So I made the set look like a rollerblade rink.
So it had all
That
these.
was in the round.
Yeah.
I did also a lot of thrust stage because at the Virgin Lab Fest, the first few years, actually up until now, it's always on a thrust stage. So 3/4, three sides.
And does that change the process of putting together
Yes, yes.
set?
Because for in the round, you don't have the luxury of a backdrop.
Okay.
Because it has to be seen by all sides, from all sides. And for the thrust, it has to be seen from three sides. So you have the luxury of a backdrop, but you don't actually have enough space on the set for a set piece that is really tall because it will block the view of the audience from the sides.
So what happens to the Rubik's Cube?
You remove one side. One layer is removed.
So
Or you can still add.
but it's still a cube, right?
Small set piece, yeah.
Yeah, it's still a cube, but you end up playing around with what exists of that cube.
Yes.
At that point. Okay.
In consideration the line of sight of the audience.
Another question from Corey is, I think we associate a lot of power dynamics between characters with levels, where someone positioned higher up is assumed to have more power or authority. As with, she cites as example, Der Kaufman. But how do you play with levels to subvert our taken for granted understandings of levels and how architecture dictates subliminal messages about the authority or power hierarchy of a certain character? Kind of connected also to Wei Liang's question about abstract work, I think. Like, what happens when the hierarchy is more complex, I think, than just, powerful, powerless, etc. Like, is there a set design that actually tried to capture that? Like, even just, I think, the movement of characters from one level to another.
It's actually the connections or the how you move your actors towards a particular space. I love corners. So I usually, if there are corners on the set, I love for other characters to move towards that corner to have the psychology of probably defeat. You have to be wary of the areas of the set because there's a psychology to it. Like it's if it's a safe space or something that is terrorizing for the character, so that character will move away from that space and so on. So it's really the dynamics between the characters and how they affect the set and vice versa.
this brings us back to like
The psychology of
presentation,
space.
the psychology of the set, where at some point, ideally for a viewer or a critic, it becomes very clear which spaces are the safe spaces, or
Yes,
how the set actually defines very particular moments and experiences that happen in the particular spaces of that set.
correct.
Yeah. I think also an interesting work might have been the when you play around with ramps, because there's
Yeah.
always a sense of movement. It's not just second floor, first floor, but always a sense of you see the cast moving up and
Yeah.
down. And in Kleptomaniacs, for example, those ramps um, appeared after a major earthquake, and it became such a major part of the set that you could see this impoverished cast. It was about an impoverished community struggling to even go up the
Go
ramp
up and down.
and down. And
Yeah.
then that it would be so they would make a big deal out of the fact that even going down seemed treacherous or dangerous
Yes.
for them. So I think that's also one of the ways in which
And at some point, there was a character who doesn't even go uh, out anymore
yeah.
because it was so traumatic for them.
So they
That
stayed in the
particular space. Yeah.
yeah. So from complexity of space, we have a very nice question that I would have asked you earlier as well. So what do you think about backdrop sets that's just painted with pictures like mountains?
I actually started with that. And my director told me to work on another work on another set because I did the more when I was younger, I did the more traditional way of scenery by painting landscapes, and it's actually important, especially for university uh, presentations of classical works, because the students who are learning about the craft will have an understanding of the evolution of sceneries and doing sceneries and the devices. Uh, so doing flats actually or backdrops help a lot for younger students. Uh, Painting them,
Yeah.
understanding why it's there,
Okay.
the scanna, the
Yeah.
scanne. Yeah.
And how would you make it like if someone at this point told you, I just want a backdrop with mountains?
It's okay. It really depends on the piece.
Yes, and then but how would you make it more complex? Maybe is the question. Like if it's something that seems too simple, how would you?
I will add layers to it. I will add layers to it to have more depth, or I can tear it at some point. Tear the canvas at some point. I don't know. If I'm the director.
See, this is why it's so hard because like you're shifting very
Yeah, I'm
quickly between one
shifting.
and the other. Here's another question: is the element of craftsmanship still part of the work of the set designer in the Philippines, or is there a separation between the designing and the crafting building of a set? Maybe in general first, and then particularly for you.
In general, it's very important that you know the craft behind the design, because it's understanding how it's being constructed, it's being created. If there's a scientific way of doing it,
Yeah.
you have to know that. If you want your stage to revolve or to, you have to understand how it's being done.
Yeah.
So you have to be there.
Are there designers who actually just design and then let it go to the
I,
craft people?
yes.
Yes. And why are you not that person? Where does that come from? The insistence on doing it this process.
Because I started as a fine art student, I guess,
Okay.
and I wanted to create. I wanted to do my own painting. If I can build my own set, I will. But I don't have the luxury of time. But as much as possible, if I want to construct things, I would. because it was embedded in me during my as a student.
And I think also when you know how to build stuff, then you don't just design for the sake of having something nice on a page.
Yeah.
You have a better sense of how, okay, is this even possible to design?
Yes.
Can like
Yes.
actors even walk across this
Yeah.
set? Because we do see
You're
sets.
actually the guinea pig
Yes,
of your
exactly.
own set.
Yes, exactly. This is from Wei Liang also. Um, in instances where you have to work with a non-theatrical site-specific setting, like the home, and you can't build majestic sets, how similar or different is your approach to design? Rather than add new set elements, how do you use what is already in that space to enhance the artistic intention that the production is trying to communicate? He's talking about actually the ang mahaplos ka.
It's really understanding from all sides the particular space. So you really have to uh, I I actually remember telling Christine, the dancer, to uh, remove all the curtains so I know what's behind it.
Okay.
So I need to see the texture of the wall. I need to see the window.
Okay.
So I really have to understand everything, the all sides,
Of this
and
space.
how big the bed was uh, in uh, in proportion to Christine.
Okay.
So I needed to scale her to the space.
Relative to that space.
Yeah.
He raises an interesting question about how do you resist the idea, I think, is an interesting question. How do you resist the idea of adding elements to that space? Like, do you take it as it is, or do you like,
Because the first time I saw it, it was actually interesting for me because
okay,
it was so bare,
okay,
and it touched a core to the poem.
yes, I was going to say that.
Yeah, the
Because in
essence
this
of
instance, the poem was about loneliness and
loneliness,
solitariness. So maybe uh,
the
the one
bare.
room, the bare room kind of works with that.
Yeah,
And the mirror. So
yeah,
I feel like that mirror was special because on the one hand, she was alone. On the other, there
yes.
was an image.
I didn't want Christine to add lights. So whatever the light of that particular room is, it was enough for me. So I will work with that. It's really capturing from what angle of
That
the
was the
candle.
that was the exercise for that
That was the
particular
exercise.
project. And then maybe this is our last question from Caside. I'm quite taken with the ideas of the Teru Teru and was wondering, do you see props as extensions of the set? And as a director, how do you use both props and set in an act of world building? So yung first question is, do you see props as extensions of the set?
Yes.
Yes. So
Have to be.
given that, how do you use both props and set in world building?
Uh, it has to be one, the scale of the prop, two, the entire set, how it's being utilized on that particular area of the set, and how it's going to push the story forward. Because if it's a prop, it has to move with the actors, or the actors push it, and how it will react to the entire uh, frame of the stage area. So I think it's very important. It's very like for the Teru Teru Bozu. Actually, the design for the Teru Teru Bozu, I had strings because it looks like a tennis ball with a skirt. So the skirt actually, I made it into strings. So at some point, when there was a line that pertains to rain, it will just go down like rain.
Okay.
And then while the head is moving down. Okay. So, and it's mostly near the actor who is saying it.
Okay.
So the composition is that he's the character is nearer to the particular prop or set piece.
So in that sense, the prop is like the set in the sense that it has to be alive. It has to have a function.
Yes,
And also it's in that case, it's practically a character,
a character.
right? It's a
Yes,
main character in the narrative itself.
yes.
I think that ends our conversation for tonight. We've been very happy with all your questions.
Thank
Um,
you.
Tux and I
You're
don't
actually
do this
very hard
ever.
to answer.
Tux and I don't do this ever. So this is very, very exciting for us.
Thank you so
And
much.
Tux, would you like to say final words?
This is actually a good exercise for critics in understanding the craft. So when Katrina asked me to do it, I said, "Well, of course." So they might have a different perspective of what's going on inside the space. And more importantly, now that we're actually experiencing this online during the pandemic, um, so going into the foundation of trying to understand how the practice of set design or designing in general helps in understanding the how we're going to move forward in the present, uh, now that we're looking at each other on the screens. Yeah.
So
So
thank you so
thank
much.
you very much
Thank
for
you to
inviting
Arts
me.
Equator and to SIFA for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Katrina and Tux. Um, I think we learn a lot about what goes in the mind of Tux in particular. Um, um, and also I think like Tux, you're quite merciful on critics because I feel that there was less pressure on us to get things right. But yet just think about more about your process of like how you think about things, the psychology of the space and all of that I think was really beneficial. So thank you so much for
Thank
sharing
you.
that with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think the questions were also really great in opening up the discussion as well. I think that's all really. So yeah, thank you. And next week we have another last session of this master conversation series. Very quickly it has gone on multimedia and video installation. So just all these different elements of design are really building, I think, our vocabulary as critics as well. So thank you so much everyone for joining us, and have a good rest of the evening.